Buckle up, folks, because things are getting kind of wild in the world of global trade.
Yeah, wild's a good word for it.
So today is Wednesday, April 9th, 2025, and we are seeing a huge escalation in the trade war between the U.S. and China,
Absolutely a pivotal moment.
with the U.S. slapping tariffs of over 100% on a ton of Chinese goods.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And we're going to break down exactly what this means, not just, for the U.S. and China, but
Right.
for the global economy and quite possibly for your wallet.
Yeah, this is one of those things that it's easy to kind of gloss over in the headlines, but it can actually have a real impact
Absolutely.
on your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to really figure out what these tariffs mean in the grand scheme of things. Are we really talking about like a full-blown global trade war?
Right.
And how are different countries reacting to this, initial volley?
Yeah, how's the world responding? That's the big question.
Exactly. So let's start with the U.S. side. I mean, President Trump is out there, kind of claiming victory already, saying that all these tariffs are actually making other countries want to cut deals with the U.S. What's the overall vibe coming out of the administration?
Well, the White House, through their press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, is definitely sticking to that message. They're framing China's retaliation against these tariffs, which originally started at 34%, remember, as a mistake.
Right.
The narrative they're pushing is that the U.S. has been getting a raw deal in trade for years.
Yeah, and they haven't been shying away from using some very strong language to describe it.
No, they haven't. They've talked about the U.S. being economically raped and pillaged. I mean, those are pretty strong words.
Yeah, and they're saying this is like a once-in-a-generation chance to reset things with China.
A unique opportunity. That's how they're putting it.
And then you've got Vice President J.D. Vance, who's really jumped into the fray, criticizing the U.S. for basically borrowing from Chinese peasants to buy their goods.
Yeah, that definitely got a reaction out of Beijing. They were not happy about that at all.
Not a good look diplomatically, maybe.
No, probably not.
But then you have Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who's sort of offering a different perspective, saying these tariffs are kind of like a starting point and, a high bar that they're setting so they can negotiate down from there.
It's kind of a good cop, bad cop routine, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe a little bit of that going on.
Yeah, we're being tough, but we're open to talking.
Right. So tough love for China.
Exactly.
So what about China? How are they handling all of this?
Well, they are not backing down at all. They've come out swinging, calling these tariffs everything from naked extortion to blunt coercion.
Wow.
I mean, they see this as a direct attack on their economic power.
Right, and they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk.
Oh, absolutely.
They've got that editorial in Xinhua, their state news agency, basically saying that the whole logic behind the U.S. tariffs is flawed.
Yeah, and then they pulled out this old video of Ronald Reagan criticizing tariffs.
I saw that.
It's a pretty savvy move, right? They're trying to use American history against the current administration.
Yeah, like, hey, you used to agree with us. What happened?
Exactly.
And, one of the things that a lot of the analysts are saying is that China thinks they can outlast President Trump.
Yeah, they're playing the long game. They're betting that he'll be out of office before they really feel the pain from these tariffs.
And they seem to be really focused on this idea of, technological resilience and self-reliance, basically becoming less dependent on other countries.
Yeah, which makes sense. If they're less reliant on imports, they're less vulnerable to these kinds of tactics.
Right, and we have to consider the possibility that they might retaliate in other ways, like maybe restricting the export of rare earth minerals.
Yeah, those are crucial for a lot of high-tech manufacturing.
Right, or maybe they'll target U.S. agricultural exports like soybeans and sorghum.
It's a complex chess match.
And it's not just speculation anymore.
No, we just got confirmation that they are hitting back hard with an 84% tariff on all goods imported from the U.S.
Wow.
And that goes into effect tomorrow, Thursday, April 10th. So yeah, things are escalating quickly.
Yeah, tit for tat.
And don't forget, they've already filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization over previous U.S. tariffs.
Right, so they're saying this isn't just a political disagreement, it's actually a violation of international trade rules.
Yes, their argument. And, they're trying to present themselves as the champions of free trade here.
Yeah, it's interesting how they're kind of flipping the script, painting the U.S. as the bully.
Right, the disruptor.
Exactly. So it's not just the U.S. and China that are caught up in this. How are other countries reacting?
Well, the European Union is getting ready to finalize its countermeasures against those U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum.
The ones that were already in place.
Right, and they're planning to hit back with a 25% duty on some key American goods.
Like what specifically?
Motorcycles, poultry, fruit,
Yeah.
things that will really impact certain U.S. industries.
Right. And those tariffs are going to be phased in starting April 15th.
So next week, things are going to start to get real.
And that's on top of the 20% tariff that the U.S. already has on pretty much all other EU goods.
Yeah, so the EU's got a lot to think about right now. They're still figuring out how to respond to potential tariffs on cars and even broader categories of imports.
So a lot of uncertainty there.
A lot of uncertainty.
Meanwhile, Canada's already taking action.
Oh, yeah. They're not waiting around.
Starting today, they're implementing a 25% tariff on U.S.-made cars that don't comply with the USMCA.
Right, the new trade agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada.
So even within North America, there's this trade tension brewing.
Absolutely.
And it's not just our allies, even Russia is getting involved.
Yeah, they've condemned the U.S. tariffs as a violation of international trade rules, and they're saying they're going to boost their cooperation with China.
So kind of like a you can't fire me, I quit situation.
Yes, sort of. They're aligning themselves with China against the U.S.
So this is really starting to feel like a global shift.
Yeah, like we're seeing the tectonic plates of the global economy start to move.
It's kind of scary, actually.
It is. And the article from Modern Diplomacy makes a really interesting point. They compare trade wars to economic coercion, like a substitute for actual military conflict.
Right, like a way to exert power without resorting to bombs and bullets.
Exactly. And they point to historical examples like the Opium Wars and the current sanctions against Russia.
And the thing about trade wars is that even though they might not involve direct violence, they can still hurt people.
Oh, yeah, especially everyday people. Prices go up, jobs are lost.
Right. And we saw how fragile those global supply chains are during the pandemic.
Absolutely. Everything gets disrupted.
And the Bank of England is actually warning that all this trade tension is increasing the risk of global recession.
So this isn't just some abstract political game. This has real-world consequences.
Absolutely. And for most of our listeners, probably the biggest concern is how all this is going to affect their wallets.
Right. Like, how is this going to hit them in their day-to-day lives?
Because let's be real, a lot of things we buy come from China, smartphones, computers, toys, clothes.
Pretty much everything.
And if those imports are suddenly hit with these huge tariffs, prices are going to go up.
They already are in many cases.
Yeah, and there's this study from the Yale Budget Lab that estimates the average U.S. household could end up spending an extra $3,800 this year because of these tariffs.
Ouch, that's a big chunk of change.
Yeah, that's a real impact.
And it's not just consumers who are going to feel the pain. Small businesses that rely on Chinese imports are in a really tough spot right now.
Right, their costs are going up, they might have to raise prices, they might have to lay off workers.
It could really hurt the overall economy, lead to slower growth, less hiring.
And more inflation on top of everything else.
Yeah, it's a recipe for a rough ride.
We're already seeing some of the knock-on effects, too. The price of Brent crude oil has dropped to its lowest point since February of last year.
Yeah, that's partly due to the trade war, but there are other factors at play, too.
Right, but it could end up affecting things like gas prices and shipping costs.
Absolutely, those are all connected.
And the financial markets are freaking out a little bit.
Yeah, the stock markets around the world have taken a hit.
Like this S&P 500 is now below 5,000 for the first time in over a year.
That's a big psychological barrier.
And there's been a lot of selling of long-term U.S. government bonds, which could push interest rates up.
Yeah, that means mortgages and business loans could get more expensive.
And beyond the pure economics, there's also this potential for anti-American sentiment to grow in other countries.
Yeah, people might start boycotting U.S. brands like McDonald's or Starbucks.
Right, and Senator Elizabeth Warren has been very vocal about all this, calling it the dumbest trade war in history.
She's also worried about a recession.
And even big companies like Walmart are nervous because they rely so heavily on imports.
Their profits could take a hit.
It's funny, there's this YouTuber, Mr. Beast, who has his own chocolate bar company, and he said that because of the tariffs, it's actually cheaper for him to manufacture his chocolate outside the U.S.
So the tariffs are having the opposite effect of what was intended.
Yeah, kind of ironic.
Totally.
And the pharmaceutical industry is bracing for impact, too. President Trump has said he wants to put major tariffs on drug imports.
And that's already sent shockwaves through the industry. European drug maker stocks have taken a tumble.
It's kind of like he's picking a fight with the whole world.
It seems that way.
And even some of our allies are feeling the pressure.
Like Japan and South Korea?
Japan's reportedly feeling pretty betrayed, and South Korea is trying to negotiate some kind of exemption.
It's putting a strain on those relationships.
So are there any glimmers of hope on the negotiation front?
Well, we're hearing that there have been some preliminary talks between the U.S. and Japan and South Korea.
Okay, so maybe there's some dialogue happening?
Yeah, and Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is scheduled to meet with President Trump next week. And tariffs are expected to be a major topic of conversation.
So maybe there's a chance for some diplomacy.
It's possible.
President Trump himself has said that, the tariffs can be in place and still be subject to negotiation.
So he's keeping his options open.
Yeah, he's also said that other countries are dying to make a deal with the U.S.
Right. So we'll see how that plays out.
The UK is also in a tricky position. They want a trade deal with the U.S., but they're also worried about a trade war.
It's a tough balancing act for them.
And then you've got people like Elon Musk who are really pushing for free trade.
Yeah, he wants a zero tariff zone
Right.
with Europe, and he's been a vocal critic of President Trump's trade policies.
So there's definitely a lot of different perspectives on this.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
So where does that leave us?
I think the bottom line is that we're in uncharted territory right now. This trade war is escalating rapidly, and it's hard to predict what the long-term consequences will be.
But it's safe to say that this is a major turning point in global trade.
Absolutely. The rules of the game are changing, and we're all going to have to adapt.
So here's a question for all of you listening. How do you think these tariffs might affect your life, even if you don't live in the U.S. or China?
Yeah, because in a globalized economy, we're all connected.
What assumptions do you have about international trade that maybe you need to rethink now that we're in this new era of trade wars?
It's something to consider.
And if you want to stay on top of this story, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any updates.
We'll keep you informed.
Because this is a story that's just getting started.
It is.